Welcome to One Way to Machines and the 8th Gen Honda Civic series. In this video, we will go over a common AC fix for the 8th Gen Honda Civic. I have had luck fixing two Honda Civic AC systems with this technique. I will also go over the differences that occurred between the black and the silver Civic in terms of restoring the AC back to 100%. Those small washers or shims on the table there are your ticket to saving hundreds or even over $1,000 on a full AC system rebuild. The two vehicles here, one is a 2008 Honda Civic with the R18 and a manual transmission. The other one is a 2007 with an automatic transmission. I've owned the silver one since it was brand new, so I know that the AC system has not been tampered with. There are people who say that there are two shims on the AC compressor, which is possible because I do not remember which one came off of which car. One is thinner than the other, but both of these Civics only had one shim on the AC compressor shaft when I removed them. This solved the AC system on both of them. The silver one, the refrigerant had never been tampered with and it wasn't low, so just removing the shim solved the entire issue. On the black Civic, I don't know the history because I bought this one used, but the one shim re-engaged the AC compressor at all times, but the refrigerant was low, so it did need a refrigerant recharge. So it's not always just one thing that's going to fix the car for you. These two here are the AC compressor relays. The correct way to do this is to buy a relay with the switch on it so that you can manually control it instead of going forward and spending the money on the relays. This was the first step that I took with both cars, as it was a less labor-intensive option. Although electrical parts are not usually returnable, so I have them here, but I did buy one for each car, and the relay was not an issue on either one of them. So this is something common on the forums that people say goes wrong with these, but I have two examples of cars that were fixed without this. This is not to say that the relays can't have any fault, it just isn't as common as the shims on these cars, and I'll go over what happens there. Let's start with Honda Civic number 1, the black Civic. So the symptoms that the car was giving was it would give AC for about 10 to 15 minutes and then it would shut off, and then it got to a point where it would give no AC. The electrical and relays were all checked and they all checked out, so that was ruled out. Now, here in front of us, I have a simulation of, say, what the AC compressor shaft is like when it comes onto the serpentine belt. Imagine this side with this washer as being the engagement point side. This here, the little shim, is in between here. And there's a magnetic clutch that mates with this side, the compressor side. So once the AC compressor clutch is engaged, imagine this washer being the magnetic clutch, it engages and everything rotates and your AC compressor works. What happens over time is this friction material wears out, and in rust belt cars, like both of these Civics, you also get rust buildup on this, and once there's some heat generated, this jumps back, and that's why you get intermittent AC on these sometimes. It works for 10 to 15 minutes. Then eventually it gets so bad and the clutches are so worn out that it won't engage at all. Now the magic that comes in with the shim that they put in from the factory is that when you remove this shim, and I cleaned up both clutch faces on the Civics because they had rust on them, but I'm pretty sure it's more due to just the friction material wearing down. At this point, they engage and they work perfectly fine. And there's people on the forums that have also done this fix and claimed these AC compressors to have gone right up to about 400,000 kilometers, which is an excellent life for these cars that you can get them to if you take care of them. So this AC repair is definitely worth doing and not worth getting a new compressor if this is your issue. For Honda Civic number 2, the automatic one, the AC just stopped working totally altogether. This was after about 12 to 13 years of use. So the electrical was ruled out as no issue on that car. The issue ended up being the exact same thing, one shim removed, and the problem was solved. Clutch face cleaned of rust. The first step before taking the AC compressor apart is to open the hood while the car is running and to check and see if the AC compressor engages and disengages. So by this, you turn on the car, turn the AC on, do a visual check, go back inside, turn it off, or have somebody in the driver's seat do this for you. We are in front of the front passenger headlight. This is the washer fluid cap. Just in front, to the front of the car here is the alternator. We are going to be looking down into this area in the next clip. Start off with the alternator. Right down here where I'm pointing, this is what you want to see spinning when you engage your AC. So all these little knobs here, these triangular pieces on the end there, if these start rotating, your AC compressor is working. If you don't get any rotation on this when you turn your AC on, it's not working. When the AC is off, this surface piece will not be spinning. So this silver piece here is always spinning with the serpentine belt when the car is on. Right here where it switches from silver to black, that little thin black piece is the one that only spins when the AC compressor is on. This car does not have the AC issue. I'm using it just to demonstrate the process. This car had low refrigerant in combination with the bad AC compressor, and it was recharged at a shop for about $100. So it's not that bad to take it in and just have them hook it up to a machine which draws out the refrigerant and puts back in the same amount. Just make sure when you go to the shop to be there and watch that they do put oil into the system so that there's oil circulating to protect your compressor. So you're going to need a electric drill or a Phillips screwdriver to remove the mud flap in the process of taking out the fender liner. You're going to need a combination of trim tools or flathead screwdrivers to get out the plastic tabs. Having all is good. If you only have the screwdrivers, you can probably get away with that too. The most important bits now, this is the actual clutch face, okay, that I've removed from the car. The 14mm bolt goes in the center here. It's a very tight clearance area, and what you need to do is, as you can see here, this is a 12-inch crowbar. It's a Mastercraft brand. Angles do matter on what the tool that you're using here because it's very tight in there with the way the frame is organized. So when you go in there, in the filming shots in the process video, it might be hard to see this, but there's a thin piece of metal that's closer to the outside of the car, and then right behind it there's a thicker piece of metal. You want to get this crowbar in on just the right angle using this side, and you're going to put pressure on this round piece here so that as you go to undo that 14mm, you give reverse pressure here. This is going to slip sometimes and you might have some frustration while you get it because you're also using a universal joint, but you just have to keep trying and moving your angles around until you're finally able to pin it, and you will crack that 14mm bolt. Why I advise against using a standard pry bar is because you'll see in the process video I hadn't done this job for a long time, so I tried doing it with the least amount of extensions to get you guys to not buy too many tools, and it doesn't work if your ratchet cannot clear your crowbar. You can see how long an actual pry bar is. So you want to rule that out. Unless you have a very short pry bar, then you can use that in place of the crowbar. So even with a 12-inch crowbar, it's just over 12 inches of extensions, including the 3/8 universal joint that's at the end of this. So with the actual ratchet and the 14mm, it just barely clears, as you can see here, and you get in there with a short 14mm, not a deep socket, because there's not enough room for a deep socket. There's only enough room for this to make the turn in there. It's already difficult to work with a universal joint in that tight of a space, so you're going to want to grab the ratchet like this, okay, with the palm of your hand at the end kind of. This gives you more power and you can control this actual part here with your two fingers in the middle. That'll give you a higher chance of cracking that 14mm loose. I've taken out the second shim that I found on the black Civic, this time on uninstall. And what's interesting is I mentioned that one of them from the silver Civic was thicker than the other one. This one has a thinner shim, the second one I took off, which matches this one. And when you put them on top of each other, they're just a little bit more thick than the single one here. So it's possible that in 07 Honda had a single shim design, and in 08 they switched to thinner two shim design. This will only be confirmed once I get the silver one in. I will remove it just so that we can confirm this, and we can see if that one also has another one hiding in there, or if it's just one, because the two thin ones are most likely from the black Civic here. For complete clarity, I'm going to reinstall the 2008 black Civic with only one shim that it originally came with, not two. You have a choice of removing one or two depending on how many your car has, but I would recommend you start off with one and then take off two if the AC compressor still doesn't work. So we've got the single shim here, the thicker one, and now the two thinner ones. I'm going to put them on top. When we push them close to each other, they're just about the same height. Once the two are stacked on top of each other, this one is a little bit taller, which is why I doubt there's going to be a second shim in the silver one when we go to do an uninstall on that.